Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. Yesterday I released a review video for the AYANEO Pocket Air, and if you saw that video, you know there are a lot of things I really liked about that device, including its screen and controls and battery life. However, one of my main disappointments about the device was related to GameCube and PlayStation 2 performance. The way I put it in the video is that at this price point and even with this chipset, I expected a lot better. And some people also noticed that the performance was actually worse than other devices running that Dimensity 1200 chip. Now, over the past day, I've been working with the AYANEO community to try to figure out what exactly was going wrong. And I'm happy to report that it ended up being a software bug and we found a fix. So I wanted to do a quick follow-up video to show you exactly where this bug is and how you can fix it in case you get one of these models and have the same issue. And we're also going to take a look at the improved performance after we've resolved it. So to start, we're going to use an app called CPU Float. This will allow us to see the clock speed of all of our CPU cores. And when I first boot up the device, you may notice that all of the cores are not running at full speed, even though I am running it in game or performance mode. As a refresher, this is an 8-core CPU. One of the cores should be running at 3 GHz, and then there should be 3 additional cores running at 2.6 GHz. And then finally, the other 4 cores will be running at 2 GHz. However, as you can see here, only the 4 efficiency cores are actually running at full speed. The other ones, which should actually be giving a higher clock speed, are actually running significantly lower. And this is why we are getting poor performance, because emulation requires a very fast single or dual core score. And in this scenario, our most powerful CPU cores are actually running at a much lower clock speed. So what's happening here is that even though the AYANEO software is showing that we are in game mode, it's actually not in performance mode. In order to actually enable it, you have to toggle it off and then toggle it back on. And this is a setting that is not persistent between reboots, so every time you start up the device, you have to go and toggle this back and forth. However, after we've made that change, you can see right here that all the cores are running at max speed. Now in hindsight, this seems like a very simple fix, but unfortunately it took us all day to kind of figure this out, and I sure wish I had known this before I had spent about 60 hours testing and filming my review video earlier this week. Now another thing I noticed within the software is that the RGB light settings are not persistent between reboots either. Even though I have the RGB setting turned to off, it still turns them on when you restart the device. So again, this is just a similar bug within that AYANEO software. Anyway, now that we have everything working in a full performance mode, I'm going to go back and play every single game that had issues in my review video. We're going to start with the more lightweight systems and work our way up, starting with PSP with God of War Chains of Olympus. All the other games played at a 4x or 1080p resolution except this one. This one originally would only play at a 3x. However, with this new performance mode, we can play this at 4x with absolutely no problem. So I'm comfortable saying that you can play every single PSP game at a 1080p resolution on this device. The next system that had performance issues was Sega Saturn. There were quite a few games that did not play at full speed, even with the more performant Yabasan core. Well, I'm now happy to say that every single game will play at full speed with Yabasan, and so as long as the game doesn't have any sort of accuracy or compatibility issues, you should be just fine within here. Now there are some games that still have graphical accuracy issues with the Yabasan core. In my review video, Die Hard Arcade was the example that I showed. So with this game in particular, you still have to use something a little bit more accurate like the Beetle Saturn core. And while this one gets very close to full speed, it's not quite there. I got an average of about 58 frames per second. There was a lot of time where it did play at a full 60 frames per second, but then it would dip down as low as about 56 here and there. So I would say this is not a perfect emulation experience with Sega Saturn with some particular games, but with the exception of a few of these games here and there, I think that Sega Saturn is going to be fully playable as well. Now the main systems I wanted to test were Nintendo GameCube and PS2, so let's move over to those. To start, there were quite a few games that would run at a 2x resolution but did have slowdown here and there. My main examples for this were Metroid Prime as well as Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. Now I'm still using a 2x resolution here with the OpenGL backend, but now these games are playing at a full 60 frames per second. It's not quite enough to be able to play most of these games at a 3x resolution, but 2x still looks great. And if you'd like to get a little bit more involved into the settings, you can actually create custom INI files for each of these games. And within those INI files, you could set it to a 2.5x resolution. That's going to set it to an 1120p resolution, so a little bit over 1080p, which will look just perfect on this screen. And given the amount of performance boost that we're seeing here, I'm pretty sure that many of these games will play at 2.5 no problem. I think a good indicator of how much the performance has improved from yesterday's video is F-Zero GX. This is a game that struggled to play at a native resolution, but now I can play it at a 2x upscale with very minimal slowdown here and there. So I think in summary, yes, this is now a GameCube capable device, which I was hoping it would be in the first place. Now, in addition to GameCube, Nintendo Wii also performs a lot better with the official Dolphin app. Many of the more lightweight games will play at a 3x resolution with very minimal slowdown, and other games that are a little bit more intensive will actually play at a 2x resolution just fine. This is quite an improvement over the native resolution that we were using in the previous video. Next, let's move over to PlayStation 2, and this one also is a night and day difference in terms of performance. A great example here is going to be Dragon Quest VIII. In yesterday's video, I had to drop this down to a native resolution and then also use some mild underclocking. However, with this new performance mode, I'm able to play it at a 2.5x resolution, and I also disabled that underclock because it was no longer needed. So here we are playing this game at 1120p, completely filling out the resolution of this wonderful display. And of course, bear in mind that PlayStation 2 performance was actually not half bad even without that performance mode fix. However, it does seem to be a lot better across the board. Even God of War 2 can now play at a 2.5x resolution with very minimal slowdown here and there. And finally, the other problem game that I showed with PlayStation 2 was Shadow of the Colossus. And this one's a little bit tricky. It can actually run at a 2x resolution, but you still have to keep on that mild underclock in order for it to run at full speed. However, I did find that the mild underclock on this game in particular doesn't really disrupt the overall emulation experience. So again, I would say this game is completely playable at this 2x resolution. And just like with the Nintendo GameCube, I'm now pretty confident that the entire catalog is going to play at least reasonably well. And finally, the last system I want to show here is Nintendo Switch. If you remember in yesterday's video, there were many games that would not play at full speed at all. And now I'm happy to report that there are many games that will run at 60 frames per second. For example, Cuphead will now play at full speed, and same thing with the Untitled Goose Game. Now, these are not heavyweight games by any means, but all the same, I think it's a good indicator that lightweight and indie games might play on the Pocket Air now. However, do bear in mind that Nintendo Switch emulation on Android is still a work in progress. Now, for the more graphically intense or 3D-based Switch games, I still had some issues. For example, Hades runs at about 30 frames per second on average. This is still about double of what we were seeing in yesterday's video, but all the same, I wouldn't consider this to be playable. And it's a similar story with Super Mario 3D World. This one got an average of about 15 frames per second in yesterday's video, and now we're seeing an average of about 40. So for me personally, I still think this is a little bit too slow to be considered playable, but it's a great sign that if emulation development continues for Nintendo Switch, we might see some big improvements. Okay, and really that's about it for this video here. I wanted to show off how to fix this software bug that I encountered, and how that would reflect in actual gameplay performance if you do use that fix. And to be honest, I'm pretty happy with this new emulation performance. Like I mentioned in that video, I've been on the hunt for a really solid GameCube and PS2 emulation device. And I think we've got all the makings of one right here. Not only do we have a beautiful 1080p OLED display, but we also have some decent controls that will work in a variety of different gameplay experiences. On top of that, this is an Android-based device, which means it's going to be a lot more power efficient, and because we have a nice big battery, we can expect about 8 hours of battery life between charges. So you might be wondering whether or not this changes my mind about the Pocket Air. And it does change a lot in terms of my own personal enjoyment, because this is exactly what I was looking for in a handheld device. And I still stand by my statement in the last video where I said this is the best device you can buy at $300. Now, of course, things change very quickly in the tech world, and so even a few months from now we might have a better solution, but as it stands right now, I am much more happy with the Pocket Air than I was yesterday. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know if you have any questions down below. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you found it helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.